Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to everyone to this event on the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, a fresh start. The Commission's new Pact, presented on 23 September, aims to strike a new balance between responsibility and solidarity among member states. Amongst others, it aims to do so by putting forward new proposals for a more secure management of the EU's external borders, as well as through new proposals on solidarity and responsibility sharing. The new Pact also, and another aspect that we'll be looking at this afternoon, puts a strong focus on building more effective partnerships with third countries, strongly so in the area of returns, but also with a view to strengthening resettlement and in creating new pathways for legal labor migration. Several recent developments, including the impact of COVID-19 on reception and asylum processes, the humanitarian urgency and emergency on the Greek islands, and reports as well of pushbacks along parts of the EU's external borders, have highlighted really the necessity and also the urgency of indeed making a fresh start in the area of EU migration policies. So against this background, we are very happy that we are able to welcome so many of you today. So we have over 300 participants that have registered for our discussion this afternoon. We're holding this event in the context of the MEDAM project, in which EPC collaborates together with the Kiel Institute for the World Economy and the European University Institute in Florence, with the support of the Mercator Foundation. The MEDAM research agenda is linked in many ways to a number of the key points of focus of the new Pact, particularly building partnerships with third countries in the areas of return, resettlement and labor migration. We've been holding several events on that over the past weeks. And MEDAM also has a strong research and publication record in this field. And I would very briefly like to refer back here to our most recent MEDAM assessment report, which was published in May of this year, and in which we look specifically at ways in which EU cooperation on migration, including on return, particularly with African countries of origin and transit, can be strengthened. In the interest of time and without further ado, I'll immediately move over to present our distinguished speakers today. We have to begin with the European Commissioner for Home Affairs, Ylva Johansson, with us. Commissioner, we are really delighted to welcome you back to the EPC, and we're very grateful that you could make the time available to join us today. Commissioner will be delivering a keynote statement, after which we will be moving over to our panelists. And there we are joined to begin with by Tineke Strik, member of the European Parliament and LIBE committee coordinator for the Group of the Greens. We also have with us Roberta Metsola, also member of the European Parliament, also LIBE committee coordinator for the European People Parties group. And thirdly, Woollard, director of the European Council on Refugees and Exiles. Each of our panelists, after the Commissioner's statements, will have 6 minutes, and I'll be very strict on time there. To our panelists, please keep an eye on your chat box. When your 6 minutes are almost finished, you will be receiving a short message. After the remarks of our panelists, we'll move back to the Commissioner for some reactions to what she has heard from the panelists. And then we'll immediately move over to a question and answer session with our audience. The Commissioner is unfortunately not able to stay for the whole Q&A session, but she is then, or at least will have instead then Alexandra Kupsan-Katalin, member of the Commissioner's cabinet, working among other things on the new Pact. 2 final household notes, and then we can fully kick off. First, this is a public discussion. It's also being recorded, so making sure that everyone is aware of that. Second, as mentioned, we will be having a Q&A. We want to make it as interactive as possible. If you want to raise the question, please do so by writing it in the Q&A box that you'll be able to see on the right-hand side of your screen. Please keep your question as short and to the point as possible so that we can also get in as many as possible. That's all from my side for now, and I'm delighted to pass the floor to the Commissioner for her keynote statements.
Thank you everybody, and good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. And I've sometimes been asked, what is the fresh with your new proposal, Ylva? And I think what I'm actually trying, at least, to be a fresh start is to make migration normal. Migration is normal, has always been here, will always be here. Migration is not a threat. And to be specific, migrants are not a threat. So that's important to say. Migration is a normal thing. Then migration is possible to manage. We can manage. We will manage if we work together. So this is one thing. Another thing is that we need to be based on facts. We need to know what's going on the ground. Who are the people that would like to come here and that are actually entering the European Union? And how are they being treated? And how should we do that properly? And to address the real challenges and the real shortcomings in our society, and not trying to fight ghosts. I think this is also important. We have a lot of challenges and shortcomings, but sometimes in the debate is like the debate is about something else. So that's also why I think it's important to de-dramatize the political debate on migration. The situation for migrants could be very dramatic. I just came home from Canary Islands, and we see a lot of people now arriving under terrible circumstances there. So the situation for migrants can be dramatic and very emotional, of course, when you see people suffering or people being in distress. But I think the political debate should not be dramatized, or should be less emotional and be pragmatic and sober to be able to reach to come forward. And what I'm addressing in my new proposal, this is the overall aim, as I just explained to you. And first, we have a lot of migration to the European Union. Last year, 3 million residence permits were issued. More than 1 million came here to work, but the majority come here because they are falling in love or for other family reasons. A small proportion of those are those eligible for international protection. And the fewer people leaving the European Union than coming. So that means we are growing. And that's good news, because we need migration. We are an aging society, so we need migration. But to be able to welcome people and to have people, all people that are eligible to stay should be part of our society. They should be welcomed. They should be able to integrate and be inclusive in society. Then I think it's really important that we can tell our citizens that we make a distinction between those that are eligible for stay and those that are not. And in my view, this is really one of the big challenges today, that we can't, a huge majority of those arriving to the European Union today are not refugees. They are economic migrants. They are searching for a better future. But that's not the same as being a refugee and need of international protection. And I think, in my view, to be able to defend and protect the right to apply for asylum and to give protection to those in need of international protection, we need also to make sure to say that those not in need of international protection, they can't stay. So for me, that's important to be able to, because I do think that a huge majority of European citizens are ready to welcome people that are eligible to stay here. But it's important that we can make that distinction. And I think right now, these days, this is more important than ever, because today a huge majority are not refugees that are coming. It's important to say also that those that are coming searching for a better future, they're not criminal. Yeah, they have the right to do so, but they don't have the right to stay. So that's also a difference. When I'm talking a lot on returns, it's also important to say that not everybody can stay in the European Union, but everybody is a human being with rights and dignity and have to be treated according to that, even if they can't stay in the European Union. So what I'm addressing in my Pact, I'm of course happy to answer a more detailed question on that. But first is I'm addressing the irregular arrivals, because that's really where people are putting their lives at risk. Just as I said, that last Friday I was in the Canary Islands, and that's the most deadly route through the Atlantic. and that's really terrible. We don't know how many lives have been lost there. So it's really important to avoid people risking their lives to come to the European Union, to avoid irregular migration. To be able to do that, we have to present legal pathways, both for refugees and for labor migration. And these are linked to each other. To be able to welcome more people on legal pathways, because we should do that both for refugees and for people who would like to come to work here, then these have to be linked to each other. We don't need fewer migrants, but we need better management of migration. The second thing I'm addressing is the returns. I think it's important that we can return people, and that's important that we do not leave migrants in limbo. And that's actually what we are doing very much today. They are coming here, they have been there for a long time, they got a negative asylum decision, maybe, but not for sure, they will have a return decision, maybe years after, and that's very difficult for this individual, for the authorities, to actually carry out the return. And we have to have a proper, good cooperation also on reintegration of those that will be returned, that should return to their country of origin. And I think we have stepped up on voluntary returns, and we can do much more on that. And I'm going to present new proposals on that soon. And the third thing I'm addressing is the solidarity between member states. The solidarity towards refugees, of course, should be addressed with the right to apply for asylum, and through resettlement, and also by showing global leadership when it comes to the refugee situation globally, where the European Union should play a role. But the solidarity between member states is now, we are lacking solidarity. And that's important that we can help each other in the European Union. And I was responsible in Sweden in 2015 for everything related to migration and integration. And Sweden was the country in Europe that took the highest proportion of asylum seekers according to population. Sweden received 35,000 unaccompanied minors, for example, during a few months. That was really a thing where they were arriving 10,000 people a week to Sweden. And that was a huge challenge. And I learned some lessons during that period. And one lesson learned is it's impossible for one country alone to deal with migration. We have to do it together. And if we fail to do it together, there is a huge risk of a race to the bottom, where each member state tries to be as restrictive as possible. And that's not sustainable. We need to work on this together, and that's why we also need a solidarity mechanism to deal with this together. I know that some people are arguing, why do I put so much emphasis on the returns, and why is the solidarity mechanism also composed by the possibility for a return sponsorship where another member state do the return? I do that because I think it's really important that we avoid people to pay for this organized criminal, very professional networks that are doing the smuggling. And if they are not being returned, that will be a factor that the smugglers will use. That's how they argue. As long as you can set your foot on European soil, you can stay. And people will continue risking their lives, continue paying into the criminal networks. So for me, it's important that we show that we make this distinction, and that's why we should help each other between member states on returns. And that's also why we need a stronger partnership with third countries. The last thing, I will stick to my 10 minutes, but the last thing I also think it's important here to be able to deal with new crises in the future is to de-dramatize and to show that member states can agree on a compromise. And that's also one aim with my proposal, to be able to be adopted by the Council and by Parliament. I know that nobody is really happy with my proposal, and that was actually the aim. I think the best thing that is to present a proposal that everybody is happy with. If that's not possible, it's better that nobody is really satisfied than to have a proposal that make half the member states or half the Parliament happy and half not. So I think this is a good basis for a compromise. And the expression that often is used is the devil is in the details. and that's for sure. That's sure. But I know my proposal. There's also a lot of opportunities in the details, and that's where it's possible to make amendments and still keep the overall architecture. When you make amendments, the balance will shift, and that's for Parliament and member states now to deal with and to negotiate about the balance. But it's possible to also make these amendments to do this. May I just say the last thing? In these times, I think what we are seeing now and what we are hearing on the rhetoric that we can hear, it's so important that we are not afraid of migration, especially not of migrants. We need to manage migration, but migration by itself is not a security threat. There might be individuals that are dangerous among migrants, but also among people that already live here. But migration as such is not a threat. It's manageable, and we can do it together if we compromise on this, and that's possible to do.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for a very comprehensive overview of some of the key elements of the new pact, which in itself, of course, is a comprehensive set of proposals, and also for further insights into the identified challenges that inform the pact, both politically and policy-wise. Moving over to our panel now, where the first panelist is Tineke Strik. Tineke, you have the floor.
Yes, thanks a lot for the invitation, and also thanks to the Commissioner for a brief overview. And also I would like to compliment her with her ambition to normalize migration and to emphasize the fact that we can cope with it and that we should not feel threatened about it. But let me also make clear from the beginning, we already have a common European asylum system. So talking about a fresh start would imply that we are currently operating in a legal limbo. We have a lot of current rules in place on reception, on procedures, on qualification. And if they would have been implemented in the correct way, we would have reached already a pretty high level of harmonization and protection. I think that we need to come up with new proposals that really are solving the problems which are now at stake. And I think that the main obstacle for getting this harmonization is indeed the lack of solidarity, but I would go a little bit further, the lack of fair responsibility sharing. And I think as a result of this, we face a lot of problems. Think of secondary movements, lack of compliance, especially by the border countries, pushbacks, for instance, but also a lack of reception conditions. So in the end, ending up asylum seekers in deplorable reception conditions and leaving them without the right to asylum. So I think that core obstacle should have been addressed. And if I look now at the current proposal, I'm disappointed that this is not happening, especially because the whole principle that the member state of entrance is and remains responsible is still established, is still clear in the proposals. And if I then think about the current situation in Moria, which is very much clearly illustrating the consequences of this system, I think that this situation will remain. All the people there will be subjected to the border procedure. There are, of course, certain time limits in the proposals, but we already have time limits now in our procedure, in our rules. So what is on paper is not necessarily going to happen, especially because of the border countries are very much relying on their own national resources, a number of legal aid, judges, and so on, because we don't have an EU system of processing asylum claims. So I don't have a lot of reasons for optimism. If I look at the flexible solidarity system, which even does not apply on the border procedure as such, so people there are not relieved. That's only in a crisis situation. I think the whole system of triggering this system is pretty bureaucratic and leaves a lot of different interpretation, like migratory pressure. It's not clear what is defined. And I can imagine that member states may contest it also, because one of the elements of this definition is that the requesting member state has done everything it could in order to have a proper asylum procedure in place. So I already see the discussions going on as to why should we help this border country. And I'm wondering, and maybe the commissioner could say something about it, why not proposing a system in which also a kind of threshold is calculated also for the border countries, where at the moment this border countries has reached this threshold, this system is automatically triggered. That would have prevented a lot of discussions and lengthy procedures before the countries are released. Indeed, a lot of emphasis on return, and I wonder, and maybe the Commission can also say something about that, voluntary departure is still prioritized. It's in the recast returns and also in the current system. But if I look how it's placed, it's in the border procedure everywhere. It's very much placed in the system of removal, of enforced removal decisions. So how can we prioritize voluntary departure? And what can we do with people who are in detention often in the border procedure and elsewhere without a perspective of return, because we are to a large extent depending on the cooperation with third countries. And I don't see, I mean, there is a paradigm shift language, but I don't see the paradigm shift in essence. So maybe you can say something about this. And especially because I think that countries, I would like to know how the Commission foresees that there will be more enforcement of compliance with the fundamental rights and with the rules. I mean, we have these pushbacks, we are faced with it, and the screening regulation proposes a monitor mechanism. This is left to the national bodies, and it's limited to the screening procedure as such. Whereas we know pushbacks do not take place from formal border crossing points. No, they take place in the forest, at sea, etc. So how are we going to prevent this from happening or combat it in a more effective way? And why not, cannot we make a more EU angle on it, so that the Commission, that EU agencies also have a role in this in order to have more instruments for better enforcement? My last remark, and then I come back to the beginning, when I said we already have a lot of rules, but we lack compliance. It's not only relating to pushbacks, but also many other areas of the asylum system. So what is the Commission going to do in order to make an effective mechanism of monitoring and enforcement of the rules? Thank you.
Thank you, Tineke, for very valuable points and yeah, key questions indeed for the future of the new pact. Also, many thanks for sticking to the time, very much appreciated. Moving over to our second panelist, Roberta Metsola. Roberta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marie. Thank you to the Commissioner. Also nice to see Tineke and colleagues online in this format. So the presentation of the new Asylum and Migration Pact has been very highly anticipated in the Parliament. We really did urgently require a reformed European asylum system that, first of all, is fair with those who are in need of international protection, but it is also firm with those who are ineligible for it, and harsh with traffickers who are profiting from exploiting the vulnerable. We had long been saying that the Dublin system, as it currently is not something that can address the very difficult situations we're in, that people's lives are being endangered unnecessarily while crossing the Mediterranean Sea, that more children are facing the fate of Alan Kurdi, and that without proper solidarity, frontline member states like Malta, my country, like Greece, Italy and Cyprus, but also new routes, as have just been mentioned, are facing enormous pressures, and that it is these cracks in the system that are leading to lives being endangered again when crossing internal borders undocumented, and that children and minors are disappearing. So with this context, we had to look at these considerations when preparing our response to the new pact, when looking at migration over the next few years, because it is our responsibility to deliver on these legislative instruments with a fresh pair, so-called, of eyes. When we look at and we talk about the idea of mandatory solidarity, this is very welcome. Our political family has long been calling for it, but also that every member state needs to pull its weight irrespective of its geographical location. So we therefore welcome the Commission's attempt to diversify the implementation of mandatory solidarity, including through the return sponsorship schemes. The applications of those ineligible for international protection puts extra pressure already on a system that is overstretched and risks diverting resources from processing cases of refugees. Now, when we look at the procedure on paper as we have it, we continue to be skeptical, and I'm sure this is going to be a long discussion going forward about the 8-month deadline for a host member state to keep a returnee on its soil, and the likelihood of securing another member state to sponsor the return before this deadline or this period of time expires. And as has been said, a state of uncertainty benefits no one. And I understand that a council representative could not be with us today, which is a pity, because we would have liked to hear more from the council about how realistic it considers the implementation of such proposals to be. And I look forward to future opportunities, in fact, to raise these points directly, because in general, we think that the deadlines as presented are quite tight. And considering the administrative burden they pose on frontline member states, it will be very challenging for those countries to cope, particularly when faced with large arrivals, as we have seen in the past years. We noticed also that in the proposal for a crisis management regulation, the Commission avoids defining disproportionate pressure of arrivals concretely. Now, trying to quantify this will be difficult for the Parliament, and I would perhaps like us to go a little bit more in detail, and I think this is the perfect forum for it, of how we are going to see a way out of this, knowing already that this is already a very difficult concept in the Council, and it has been mentioned. Now, finally, on the question of the package approach to these files, this is another question that would concern. I would ask the Council this, but also we in the Parliament need to identify a strategy going forward in this, and perhaps the Commission can also shed some light. While we know that the current presidency has taken the initiative to revive the negotiations on the European Agency for Asylum, this is something we have been asking for years, and we welcome this. But we also hear some contradictions between different member states about concluding this process on what we would have considered to be just minor amendments that would finally have a proper, fully fledged operational asylum agency on the ground. So I would also like perhaps to hear any reactions on this at this time. I'm also looking forward to having questions put to us, and I'm looking forward to being able to answer them and continue the debate with my colleagues. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks for very interesting points as well. And we already see a few points coming back to mention one question on implementation. And indeed, as mentioned, questions are coming in. Please, to our audience, don't hesitate to already start putting them in the Q&A box if you have any. Over thirdly to Catherine Woollard for her remarks. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Let me start by saying how much we so strongly welcome the continued positive rhetoric from the Commissioner. I think this is extremely refreshing, and this is what we need from our political leaders. Also this year, the strong emphasis on access to asylum from the Commissioner and her office is also, I think, very important. Our concern with the Pact, however, would be that it may undermine some of that positive approach. And there are elements there that represent a continuation of this strategy of trying to prevent arrivals into Europe. I think, like in 2016, we see efforts to use legal reforms to resolve political conflicts. even though the differences between the member states start to seem irreconcilable. Let me comment on 3 points here: borders, deportations and solidarity. On the border piece, one of the focuses is, of course, keeping people at borders and using the border procedure to do that. Fortunately, the scope of the border procedure is narrower than many had predicted, which I think is a welcome element. Nonetheless, there are concerns with an expanded use of a border procedure. In our assessment, border procedures are not fair, and they don't lead to fair asylum procedures because of the short timelines involved, and also because procedural guarantees, such as access to legal assistance, are either absent in law or hard to realise in practice. In addition, border procedures almost always involve detention, either formal official detention or de facto detention. And I would draw the participants' attention to a study published this week by the European Parliamentary Research Service, to which we contributed, which shows that in practice, these two issues arise in border procedures. A focus on borders also means that refugees are more likely to suffer, given that they are the ones who are forced to cross borders in order to seek protection. So we do see a risk of a Greek island-like situation arising here, which in turn undermines prospects for integration at a later stage. So in terms of the border element, we would propose a further narrowing in the use and scope of the border procedure, clear exemptions, and also adding the procedural guarantees that should be there. In general, our argument would remain that it is better to simply invest in efficient, regular procedures and keep border procedures limited and optional. On the independent border monitoring mechanism, this is also a very welcome development. There was a statement published by NGOs today which recommend expanding the scope of the mechanism and also measures to ensure that it is genuinely independent. My second point on deportations, as has already been mentioned, the emphasis on return runs through the proposals. Return is a valid part of any migration policy, but this disproportionate focus and resources allocated to deportations is something that's been going on for 20 years, and it doesn't lead to a resolution of the issues facing European asylum systems. In this case, I think there's also a risk that it will actually backfire, because this is an element that is not controlled by Europe. It depends on cooperation of third countries. We would add that the focus on return is often based on a false premise that most people arriving in Europe are not entitled to protection, and the reference is made to first instance decision making, whereas if decision processes are followed right through to the end, actually it's probably a majority of those arriving who do receive a protection decision, even before we look at protection needs which aren't identified in decision making. I think there's also a risk here that it continues the efforts to capture and control external policies and external funding, which may in turn actually undermine efforts to tackle displacement. My third and final point is solidarity, and the main reference there, the huge regulation on asylum and migration management, which I will call the RAM, an epic piece of work from the Commission. Overall, of course, the basic rules of Dublin III remain, including the country of first arrival principle. In return, ECRI's long-standing position also remains that a deeper reform of the rules is necessary, including removing this first country of arrival default. A problem with Dublin III is that the hierarchy is not respected in practice. So our question then is, why would this be different? Why would family reunification, which is the top of the hierarchy, be respected this time round? There are some improvements which should be preserved and expanded, notably wider definition of family and more appropriate evidential standards. We would also add measures to try and extend the deadlines for family reunification cases, but also more remedies and challenges when there are rejections of valid take charge requests in family reunification cases. Unfortunately, some negative elements of Dublin IV are back, and from our perspective, these should be removed. There is near permanent responsibility without responsibility shifting at a certain point. And the take-back request becomes a take-back notification, which is something that's imposed, not a mutual process. And the punitive approach to secondary movement is also back. In the absence of deeper reform, it is positive that 2 solidarity mechanisms are proposed. One for disembarkation, which is essential. It's necessary to have a firmer legal footing and predictable arrangements when it comes to disembarkation, and the second for situations of migratory pressure. There are a number of concerns in regard to the solidarity arrangements, just to summarise a few. The types of solidarity. Relocation, yes, positive, including the element of meaningful links as part of the criteria for relocation or for choice of destination for relocation. Return sponsorship, highly problematic from our perspective because there continues to be a risk of refoulement when decision making is not fair, which is the case as we see given divergent protection rates across Europe. And the fact that if sponsorship doesn't work, the person is transferred to the sponsoring member state. And unfortunately, in some cases, they won't be safe if they're transferred to those countries within Europe because they're not adequately respecting international or EU law. And in practice, we know that none of those countries is likely to actually accept people. The third type of solidarity is capacity building, and here we would suggest a stronger focus on strengthening capacity of asylum systems rather than focusing on return and external cooperation. And this could be done by building in the tackling the implementation gaps when it comes to compliance with existing standards. Finally, my final point in general, it's all about solidarity within the EU. There's not enough about solidarity with displaced people because there is a reduction in protection standards. And there's also limited solidarity with the major refugee hosting countries. We would draw the attention to the reference in the RAM Article 3 to partnerships and suggest working and amending this because it continues that effort to allow interior ministers and DG Home to be involved in external policies or to create parallel external policies, thus undermining the efforts of EU external policy. To conclude, I think from a protection perspective, this package is better than the 2016 proposals, but it's probably worse than the status quo. There are still opportunities to try to focus on what to us should be the priorities, which are compliance with existing standards. Does it do enough to resolve the political conflicts among the member states? Nothing is enough for the V4. They don't want Europe to offer asylum. They're more opposed to refugees than they are to migrants for whom they compete. And they use this issue as a distraction tactic to draw attention away from corruption and attacks on the rule of law. So there's nothing doing there, but could there be a majority? Is there a potential QMV situation emerging? In our view, the proposal is not a good deal for the countries at the external borders, but they may be persuaded. So, for instance, Greece may be persuaded so long as there are no efforts to address its ongoing and flagrant violations at its borders. Similar situation for Croatia. For Italy and Spain, they may be persuaded, but probably only if other political and economic concessions beyond the migration field are offered.
Thank you, Catherine, for a series of very valuable points as well. Time is limited, so I'll immediately move over to the Commissioner again, looking forward to her reactions to many different points that have been raised and have been addressed to her. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I will. There was a lot of good points raised here, so I will try to answer some of the questions and just a few remarks about it, because I think this, of course, the debate needs to go on. But first to Tineke, why have we not defined the migratory pressure with a specific threshold? Of course, that's possible to do. That's part of what I said, the possibilities of amendments. That's possible to do. I choose not to do it. And the reason is that I think that what composes a migratory pressure towards one member state could be something else that is a migratory pressure towards another member state. I think it's not only about how many migrants are coming. It's also about, for example, who are they? Where are they coming from? Are there a lot of people that are unaccompanied minors, a lot of vulnerables, for example, that could be more pressure than if there are other stronger groups? If this country, for example, have other, I mean, just obvious example, if there's an earthquake at the same time, you will be easier at pressure than if it's not, for example. I mean, so that's why we didn't want to put a specific threshold, but to make it possible to make the judgments. But of course that's possible to do, but that was not my proposal to do it. And that a little bit also to Catherine, why don't we have a total European system for all migrants that are coming, or relocating everybody, or distributing everybody? For me, that's part of migration. Is something normal. All member states have to deal with migration. You can't have a situation where sorry, this is not what you're saying, but I've heard some others in the debate like, oh, there's a migrant, Europe, help us. You know, we don't want that, because migration is normal, and all member states have to have capacity to deal with the normal situation of migration. So that's why I don't want to have, you know, a relocation or distribution kicking in at the first place. That would be when there is pressure. How can we prioritize voluntary return, asked Tineke, and I think we have stepped up on voluntary returns. I think it's, I don't have the figures in front of me, but I think it's gone from around 17, 18, 19% down to 27 or something like that as a proportion. So we can do more on voluntary returns, and to be able to do that, time is of the essence, so that people will have a quick decision. So they know that this is what you have to do, but you're not able to stay here, and they are not already being part of society. That's part why we have the border procedure, so that I think that will help for voluntary returns. But it's also important to recognize people that have come here. I mean, for many of them, they have been raising money in the whole community, maybe, to be able to pay for the smuggling, for this person to reach the European Union. And when this person have reached, it's mostly a male, but not always, the European Union, there's like a, yes, we did it. The whole community did it. We managed to get him into the European Union. Then I'm hoping that's a success, and that would also paying back to the community. And of course, going back then is could be seen as a failure for the whole community that actually invested in sending this person to Europe. So it's important to understand this mechanism, and also how to help also for reintegration, and to have a proper way to come back without being a total failure. So this is also something to take into account for the voluntary returns. And Tineke also asked about the compliance with the rules, and of course that's a very, very important issue. And Catherine and Roberta also, I think, all mentioned that this is of course extremely important, and we can do a lot here. But I think the monitoring, the independent monitoring mechanism at the border, and with the screening process is one thing. We also have the EASO, or the EU Asylum Agency, that should be monitoring the border procedure, and I think that's also important. We're going to measure the capacity that the member states has when it comes to dealing with the asylum process, and that's also part of it. So these are also beside of course, infringement procedures that we can do us and also use. To Roberta, I think it's important to see that the irregular arrivals that we had last year was 140,000, and this year probably even fewer. At the same time, we had about 400,000 asylum seekers that entered the European Union legally, and visa-free or visa overstayers, and then apply for asylum. So the asylum applicants are not focused on the countries of first entry for the irregular arrivals. We have more asylum seekers per capita in countries like Belgium, Germany, I think Netherlands, Sweden, than we have in Italy or Spain. So it's important to see that we also have other arrivals that also need to be dealt with in this. And the border procedure that is voluntary today, and very few use it, that's a maximum time of 4 weeks. And of course, I think that's too short. 12 weeks could be too short for some procedures, and then this person had to go to the normal procedure. If it's a complicated issue, I mean, then they can't stay there. I think it's important to have time limits, and that should not be too long. I really think, also to Roberta, I'm really in favor of the package approach. That's why I've tried to make a package in our proposal. But even though I think it's possible to make an agreement on the EU Asylum Agency, and maybe also on Eurodac. And I think that will help our system. We need that right now to be working. So I do hope that, I think that the Parliament is ready. I do hope that the Council will be ready too, to continue on this, because I think, in my view, that's possible to do without destroying the package approach. Yeah, and then to Catherine, I think it's important to see that and that the border procedures are very much linked to the possibility of returns, especially voluntary returns, but it's also linked to the appetite for other member states to do relocation. So I think this is also, they're linked to each other, because some of the member states that usually step in with relocation are also actually having a lot of arrivals that, even if they're not countries of first entry. So these are linked to each other. The possibility to actually saying to their citizens that we should relocate more people, and that's part of my solidarity proposal. And the proportion of those that that are not refugees, it's right what you say when you take all the asylum applications into account, but not when it comes to the irregular arrivals. That we have a majority actually that are not in need of international protection. Last, I would really agree with Catherine on the rule of law. That's not only linked to migration, but it's also linked to migration. And in my view, this is the most critical thing for the whole European Union. We can't defend the rule of law in all our member states. We were really at a risk as a whole European Union. This is maybe the most critical issue. And that's also, of course, linked to the possibility to give a proper process and proper protection to migrants. But it's broader than that, and that's, in my view, it's very good that we have this agreement now with the Council and the Parliament on the MFF. We recently presented the rule of law report. I think for this mandate, the rule of law will be one of the most crucial things that we all that are involved on European level, but the Commission, Parliament, the Council need to deal with, because so much are linked to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your open engagement with so many different points that were raised to you. I believe you will have to leave us soon, so let me also take this opportunity to thank you more generally for being part of the discussion. We very much valued your presence with us this afternoon. But as mentioned in the beginning, your member of Cabinet, Alexandra Kupsan-Katalin, will be staying with us. So once more, thanks again, Commissioner, for valuable input. We'll be moving over to the question and answer session now, and I'm happy to see that we've received many very interesting questions already. What I'll do is that I'll take 2 to 3 questions at a time. I'll mention the name of the question selected, and then our colleagues from the EPC who are in the background will be unmuting you as a participant, so you can also raise your question orally. Again, I would like to stress that we really appreciate if you could keep your question as short and as to the point as possible. I've seen some people asking several questions. Please, when you are given the floor, select 1, maximum 2 questions, not a series of 4 to 5 questions, but bear in mind that we'll have several rounds of Q&A so that we can always come back to other ones. So for the first questions, we had a series of questions, but they can be grouped together, I think, on the role of Frontex by Alexandra Boog. I'll then pass over to Berend Paroussel, and then for a third question for this first round to Georg van Harreg. So over to Alexandra first. Alexandra, the floor is yours. I hope you can connect.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. This question was addressed to Commissioner Johansson, who stepped out. So I hope Alexandra Kupchan can reply on her behalf then. So we are aware, I am aware that today the Commissioner was in a meeting with the Management Board of Frontex. And in the meeting, the reason why the meeting was asked for was because of the recent article from Der Spiegel regarding Frontex involvement in pushbacks. And I was wondering how did the meeting go, and if the Commission has committed to investigate fundamental rights violations by the agency. And as well as if there were other topics on the agenda, for example, the independence of the fundamental rights officer, considering the ad interim one, that is, who used to be an advisory to the executive director, and if her independence has been discussed, considering that by December 5th, at least 40 fundamental rights officers, monitors, should be employed, and they are to be selected by the fundamental rights officer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Over to Bernd Paroussel.
Hello. Yes, this is Bernd from Sweden. I would like to ask a question regarding the solidarity mechanisms in the management regulation. I see the problem, or I'm afraid that they might lead to permanent debates both between and within the member states about numbers of people to be accepted. So countries will ask themselves, how much do I have to accept? Are others doing enough? Are other countries accepting enough people? Are they doing enough to contribute to a good solidarity situation in Europe? And I wonder whether that might lead this kind of debates, if they will be going on all the time, will that lead to migration being perceived as something normal, or will it just perpetuate in some way this emergency or crisis perspective that we've had for several years now? So my question is simply, do the panelists share this concern? Do they see this problem as well, or maybe they have a different take on it? Thank you.
Many thanks, Bert. Over to Georg van Harreg for a third question, and then we'll move back to our panel.
Hello, do you hear me? Great. It's Georg van Harreg from Channel News. A question, but first to the Commission representative, since the Commission is not here anymore. Phrases like "turn back the boats" that come out of the British government, do they worry the Commission? How's the Commission planning to deal with the migrant problem within the English Channel after the Brexit transition period is over? And a question to Catherine Woollard, when also about the end of the Brexit transition period, are you worried about migrants in the English Channel and what happens to them now the UK is no longer in the EU? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll first turn over to the Commission, and then we'll of course move over to our other panelists as well. So Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Marie, and thank you, colleagues, and I'm pleased to be with you today. So on the first question on the Frontex, indeed today there has been the first an extraordinary actually management board of the agency called by the Commissioner herself in light of the reports concerning alleged pushbacks. And the feedback, of course, I mean, the Commissioner herself participated in the meeting. I was not there, but the feedback that we have received from the Commissioner was that it was a good start for what she wants to make sure that it will be a fully transparent process. So the Commissioner has asked the Executive Director to make sure that there are all the questions raised with respect to these allegations are provided replies to ahead of the next scheduled board meeting, which will take place at the end of November. So as you know, under the rules of the agencies, actually there are specific rules on what are the the procedural follow-ups that the executive director needs to do in the case of allegations of fundamental rights violations. So we are following up on that to make sure that the law is being applied. So both on the legal side, but equally, as I said, on the political side, because of the commissioner own personal involvement and yes, commitment to follow up with the agency very closely. So I don't know, Marie, if you want me to continue on the other points or.
Yes,
or
please do
the other.
to address all the different points, and then we'll move over to the other panelists.
Yes, I mean, I will briefly reply to the second question on the solidarity mechanism. The third one, I think I could not hear very well. What was it? It was a question in relation to the UK, so maybe the colleague could repeat it. But in relation to the solidarity mechanism, of course. This is something which is now being discussed in the council, which will be discussed equally in the parliament. The commissioner explained the reasons why we did not go for a kind of mathematical approach, a threshold in terms of triggering the mechanism, the solidarity mechanism. She referred to the different contexts that have to be addressed in migration situation, but equally this is something which we have tried before. Remember, in the 2016 reform, the Commission put on the table a solidarity mechanism which was automatically triggered at a specific threshold, etc. That proposal did not fly at the time, and we considered this time that it is much better to put in place something which is still very thorough. So we are basing ourselves not on qualitative assessment with involvement from the agencies and all the relevant stakeholders. The question of how many people member states will have to take and to be responsible for, I do share your kind of concerns or points that you raised, in the sense that of course this will be a question that will be put on the table. Some member states already have asked it in the negotiations to have a clear idea on how many people they would be expected to relocate as such. But again, as the Commissioner has explained, for us this is what is important is to build up a system which is about managing migration. So finding appropriate solutions, both when it comes to people that are in need of protection, that most likely will have to be relocated, and equally those that are not in need of protection and that will have to be returned. So it is. Look at it also from the perspective of objectives and principles that we want to pursue. So this is, and equally, the migration situation. It's a very it's fluctuating. The situation today is not the situation of yesterday. Will not be the situation of tomorrow. So most likely, the question of figures and simulations and numbers will be put on the table. Will be asked by the member states and probably also by the European Parliament, and we will have to look at it somehow as a kind of limited exercise. This will only reply to part of the question. The replies are much more comprehensive, and they are related to the way in which we envisage to manage migration as a whole. So Marie, over to you, because the last question I was not able to follow it.
Can I repeat the question? Can you hear me now?
Very briefly repeat it, and if not, I can also read it out in writing. But if you could briefly repeat it, that would work.
The question is about the English Channel and migration to the Brexit transition period at the end of this year. Is the European Commission worried about the attitude of the British government talking about turning back the boats? And what is the Commission going to do about migration in the English Channel?
Yes. I mean, this is indeed a very pertinent question and a very sensitive topic. Also, because we know that today today or yesterday rather, the UK was one of the member states that was considered as such as one of the benefiting member states from the former Dublin system or the existing Dublin system. So the UK was the member state that was sending back applying the take back procedures under the Dublin rules towards the other member states. So of course this is a question that is in our attention, that focuses our attention both from the perspective of what happens on the UK side, but also member states raise it with us. I mean, France, for instance, we know that the difficult situation that has been in the past, with which France has been confronted in the past with Sangat, etc. So we do not want in the future to repeat the same mistakes in the past and to see centers as a Sangat 10 years ago with people camping in very bad conditions in France in the attempt to reach the UK shores. So definitely this is a pertinent question. We are looking into it, but as you know, this is part of the wider of course considerations and negotiations that will have to take place with the UK as part of the future relationship.
Many thanks, Alexandria. I'm moving over to my other panelists as well to see if they wanted to come in. I'll first check in with Catherine, to whom the Brexit question was also directed.
Thank you. I'll come in, if I may, first on the solidarity question and then reluctantly come to Brexit. So on solidarity, in response to Bernd's question, I think it's a fair point. The RAM, the Regulation on Asylum Migration Management, is fiendishly complicated. At first sight, my analysis was that it was really a mess. I'm sorry, that's a negative expression, but in fact, I find it almost like a work of twisted genius, because there's an attempt to design a law which tries to reconcile irreconcilable positions and interests of the member states, and that's why it looks like it does. But that complexity is highly problematic from a protection perspective. But that's not the point. I mean, it's hard to see how it will turn out in practice. A few elements I would mention. There's a very strong role for the European Commission in this, in assessing needs in situations of migratory pressure and crisis, and also in defining responses to where needs are identified. And the question there is the Commission an honest broker? Is it neutrally looking at all the member states and their interests? Secondly, is the priority of the Commission to defend asylum, or is it other priorities? So is it a risk, or is it a positive thing that the Commission has such a strong role? Secondly, there's an inherent dilemma. From a legal perspective, there are lots of issues arising with the idea of return sponsorship. However, politically, it seems this was necessary in order to get some member states to agree to solidarity at all. They needed to have that option, and they're the ones who promote return. So indeed, the Commission is being quite clever by saying, well, you want return, we're offering you return sponsorship as a solidarity mechanism. But from a protection perspective, that again is problematic for the reasons I mentioned before. Finally, your fear that this will lead to a stalemate. I think in terms of the disembarkation piece, it's a positive development, because what you have is solidarity needs identified well in advance and supposedly planned for in advance. So if that works, it's preferable to a situation when ad hoc arrangements are put in place while people sit on rescue ships being refused the option of disembarkation. The final comment, I will just come in on the UK Brexit question. In terms of asylum, I'm not sure that Brexit will change very much. The UK was already becoming sceptical about Dublin because it was receiving more people, the trend had changed to receive more people through family reunification than it was able to effectively send back. There's no chance, I think, of opting in or cooperation. When it comes to the situation in the Channel, we see the UK taking actions that endanger people and often constitute violations of international law, when there's a small number of people concerned, and it would be more than manageable for the UK to deal with those arrivals. Of course, people shouldn't feel the need to cross the channel in that way. That means asylum systems functioning effectively within the rest of Europe. But it also demonstrates that the idea of pull factors is really a myth. The UK has done everything possible to deter people from wanting to go there, but still they do. And that's because of reasonable beliefs and ideas that we all would understand: family connections, language, prospects of work. So despite having a already very harsh system based on detention and deportation, it doesn't deter.
Thank you, Catherine. I also want to see if either Tineke and or Roberta would like to come in on any of the preceding points before we move over to a second Q&A round. Tineke, please do come in.
Thank you. I would like to say something about the pushbacks and then also on the solidarity and what may trigger a nasty debate. Regarding compliance, it's clear that pushbacks are the most flagrant violation of the EU rules, as it violates the right to asylum, and it's often accompanied with a lot of violence. Now, what my experience is during the last year, it is very difficult to really grasp what's going on, but also to get some action being undertaken on the EU level. And I think this is very worrisome. We also saw with the persistent reporting on pushbacks by Croatia, which were very coherent and persisting, then still the Commission concluded that Croatia was fit to enter the Schengen area. And it took a lot of effort to make clear that even the budget for monitoring was not spent on monitoring at all. So I'm very happy now that some steps are being taken, and especially also with the message that we just got that the EU Ombudsman is going to do an inquiry on the pushbacks undertaken by Croatia. And we also, as a LIBE committee, asked the Fundamental Rights Agency to investigate all the allegations of pushbacks along the external border of the EU, and they will release a report this month. So I think actually we want to see the Commission being more vigilant on this. Now you see more circumvent, other actions in order to complement or to replace these omissions. And I really hope that the Commission is going to operationalize its ambition for more compliance. We were pretty shocked before the summer at the hearing on the shooting incidents that the Commission said, look, we're not an investigative body. And of course, if the Commission as a guardian of the treaty, which is supposed to supervise compliance, they should do investigations if necessary, if there are sufficient signals, not only on national legislation if it's on place, but also how authorities apply the legislation. And this also regards Frontex especially. Now you see that the mandate is growing of Frontex, the number of staff is growing, and we still don't have this expansion with the fundamental rights monitors, which really should be taken place as quickly as possible. And we have indeed these questions around this fundamental rights officer, if they can really act independently and more transparently. We are also looking at ways to come up with a more effective solution, to know what is exactly the problem here at stake. Is it the lack of rules? Actually, I don't think so. I think the rules are pretty clear. Is it the lack of bodies? Actually, also not. We have national and European bodies that could supervise and that could play that role. I really think it's really a matter of a lack of political will. And to be honest, if I talk with ministers from Croatia, from Greece, they actually all say, look, we are backed by the other member states. They want us to do this. And I think this is really the most concerning element of this problem. How can you get them on a way performing with compliance? I think the only way is if we really organize the solidarity better. And then I come to this other question. I come from the Netherlands, and my Prime Minister Rutte also said to Skinas in the consultation stage, look, I need a legal obligation, because otherwise from each case I get very nasty debates in parliaments that opposition parties or political groups say, let's buy out, we don't want to have them. And I think this indeed could lead to less support instead of normalizing migration and responsibility sharing. So we would really take a look at that, how it works in practice. And I would also think, I'm not sure, we have a QMV decision-making process. Are we now doing this kind of proposal in order to get everyone on board, or wouldn't it be enough to get sufficient support for a QMV decision? As Catherine rightly said, it will never be enough for some member states. So why necessarily try to keep them on board and have this watered down system, which may have perverse effects? And maybe my last words, if I may, on search and rescue. There are certainly positive elements here, but I think we would really have needed an automatic distribution after disembarkation, because now still with the remaining principle of first entrance, which makes Italy, Malta more responsible. We have this border procedure with flexible solidarity system. I'm afraid that it may still lead to looking away, from people who are in distress at the sea. So let's see how it works out, but let's really closely monitoring it in order to see if we need adaptation of the system.
Thank you, Tineke. The clock is ticking, and I still definitely also want to make sure that we at least get one more question in. But first, over to Roberta. Is there anything you would like to add to any of the previous points?
Perhaps I should wait for the next question, because I don't know how much longer we have, and then I'll loop into what Catherine and Tineke have said. I have some points to make.
Okay, thank you, Roberta. So then for the very final question, over to Marie Walter-Franke, who has a question for all of our panelists. Marie, I hope that you're connected.
Yes, I'm here. Thanks to everyone. I will be short. I just wanted to comment on the border procedure, which was mentioned several times. There is an intention by the German presidency to find a political agreement among all member states by the 4th of December on the principle of having border procedures and these processing centers. And my worry on this is that I don't really understand how we can have a political agreement on the principle without sorting out how this is going to work, especially for the first country of entry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. So I'll move one more time to all of my panelists. I'll ask them to all of them to please keep their remarks very short so that we don't go over time too much. And I'll start then with Roberta, who can answer to this question, but also might want to pick up on any of the previous points.
Thank you. I think the question that has just been posed, I also perhaps more indirectly refer to it, because it's not a matter of what, but how, more than anything. When we talk about border procedures, we're not pretending that there are currently no border procedures. When you enter a country, whether regularly or irregularly, there is a procedure that has to be followed, irrespective of which member state, if that is an external border. So what I would have liked also, as our colleague and the participant said, is ask the presidency what it aims to achieve by the 4th of December. We have seen, of course, this before, where you have sort of a broad political agreement. The ambassadors come together just a few days before the end of the presidency and say, look, we've solved the overarching ideas. We go to European Council next week. You'll have, hopefully the majority, I say this carefully, of the prime ministers who will welcome those overarching principles. But then it's us, the legislators, that have to literally tear it apart and see what this means. Because we could, of course, talk about this border procedure, but how long is it going to take? Who is it going to affect? Where are the fundamental rights monitors going to be? As Tineke asked, this is something that we have been asking for in this parliament across the whole political spectrum. I myself had worked also with the Greens in this parliament in order to make sure that we ramp up the internal review procedures of Frontex, now the European Border and Coast Guard. We increased the avenue that were available, or at least not available before. We wanted to strengthen them for review procedures at the border. But still, will that change the current situation where if you are a country of first entry, will you feel that this pact is going to alleviate that responsibility? Remember, I mean, I will refer to my own country, an island. When we entered the European Union, we needed to learn these procedures. We were suddenly responsible for the whole of the European Union. And then we came to the European Union and said, you know what, this is not only our responsibility, it's also yours. And everybody turned away because they were far away from the problem. And then in 2015, the larger member states started to make the same arguments we had been making since 2008. And then suddenly it became an issue that needed to be resolved. So I'm looking forward very much to see what these overarching political points are going to be by the end of this presidency. But my fear is that we will go back to what we did in 2017, where we had an overarching political agreement, where we had a mechanism that could have been put into place with member states, with a qualified majority in council, mind you, would have at least put on paper that every member state would participate or share a part of the responsibility. And then a few days later, it all unraveled and nothing was spoken of again. So I really admire the current Commission, both Commissioner Johansson and Vice President Skinas, but also President von der Leyen, because their aim is to conclude, to reach solutions, to finally come with some answers. I look forward also not only to this presidency, but also to the incoming presidency that has outlined it, the Portuguese presidency, as a priority. But we need to work on legislation. That is what we're here for. We're not only politicians with big words. We need to deliver legislative instruments that work on the ground everywhere in Europe and not just in a couple of member states.
Many thanks, Roberta, for those remarks. As promised, final words of our other three panelists. Please keep it very short, maximum a minute. I'll move over to Alexandra first. Alexandra, the floor is yours, but you're muted.
Yes, thank you, Marie. So yeah, maybe a few remarks of a more general nature as well on my side. And actually, I will start with the point made by Roberta right now on the fundamental rights monitors, because I should have said that in the extraordinary management board meeting today, this is a point made very clearly by the Commissioner and DG Home on the need to step up the internal processes that the agency needs to carry out with a view to appoint these 40 fundamental rights monitors. I think our planning was to have them appointed by early December, and the agency needs to step up their actions in that respect. So that is very important, and the point that the Commissioner made on a regular basis and stressed it again today in the management meeting. On the border procedure, I can only echo a bit what Roberta said again. The fact that we are working, as you know, very closely with the German presidency. We also have to acknowledge that they have a very difficult task as well in front of them, because they started work immediately as soon as the proposals were on the table. They scheduled a huge amount of meetings with the member states to try to advance as much as possible. So there are meetings tomorrow. There will be the council that will take place on Friday. There will be another council in December. So efforts are not spared to try to make as much progress as possible on the Commission side. I think it is very important, and we're going to stress this again, not to lose the sense of momentum and to continue and to leave a good basis for the Portuguese presidency to take forward and to start as soon as possible, as also Roberta mentioned, the work on the legislative proposals, because as the Commissioner rightly said, you know, the devil is in the details, but also the possibilities are into the details. So we have to start discussing the legislative proposals, including on the solidarity, so everything that is in the asylum and migration management regulation, as soon as possible. So the border procedure, I also find it very hard for member states to agree on anything, even on the principle as such of the border procedure, without seeing the other side of the picture, which are the solidarity aspects. Maybe one very brief comment, if you allow me, Marie, very short on the compliance, because this came at a number of occasions in the discussions today, and I only wanted to stress how important this is for us as Commission. We don't want to repeat the mistakes in the past, which was to reform our systems who are not implementing those that we have in place. And on the compliance side, we took a number of measures, including when it comes to the pushbacks. So we see the reinforced roles of the agencies, the EU Asylum is playing a key role in the monitoring of the border procedure. Frontex agency as well in the monitoring of the border procedure, and in wider terms when it comes to the respect of fundamental rights at the external borders. But equally, and I wanted to stress that this is something very important in our proposals, it's a new governance that we are putting in place. Today we different asylum systems, different return systems, no one is talking to each other. So what we are aiming with our proposal is to put a proper governance system in place with a European strategy, with national strategy. Implementation will be a key element of those strategies, and the Commission will step up its efforts also on that front. Thank you, I will stop here.
Thank you, Alexandria. Catherine, any very short final points from you before moving over to Tineke?
Thank you. It's very encouraging to hear that emphasis on compliance from the Commission. I think to answer the person's question who came up about possible political agreement, from our side, it almost misses the point. The attempt now is to get an agreement which is based on limiting the number of people who can access protection in Europe by continuing to transfer responsibilities outside Europe, but also to get an agreement which prevents onward movement within Europe. So you have on the table this offer of increased border containment in the border procedure, the screening process, tolerance of prevention of access at borders in exchange for solidarity, a certain amount of solidarity. I think as it stands, it's not a good deal for those at the border, but we would rather suggest a different deal, which is to reform fundamentally the responsibility sharing principles and in exchange insist on compliance with existing EU and international legal standards. But the decision was not made to follow that approach. Nonetheless, in the meantime, none of this happens in a vacuum. So the emphasis on abiding by standards should continue rather than the pretense that there's nothing in place.
Thanks, Catherine. Tineke, any final words from you?
Immediately to follow up on what Catherine said, her principle could be also a blueprint for the external dimension, I would say. So show solidarity with third countries, support them a lot with money and with resettlement in exchange for compliance, giving access, etc., etc. Instead, now what we do in exchange for strengthened border controls and readmission. Regarding compliance, I'm also happy to hear from Alexandra that this is really a priority for the Commission. I would add to that, we really need a reinforcement of the capacity in the Commission also to work on it. And we would also need to make sure that this monitoring also applies to the grey zone. So not only to the official spots where procedures are applied. Regarding the question about, all of a sudden start to organize a border procedure without knowing the effects, this is a very crucial question, I think. I mean, if we want to make migration policy a more rational policies, more normalizing it, then I think we should definitely make sure we have an evidence-based policies. And that means that we need to do impact assessments before we come up with a new system in place. And well, this is time after time happening that we lack impact assessment. It was the same with the first package proposal in 2016, and it also violating, of course, what is said in the rules on better regulation and so on, that we need to know what we are talking about. It's very difficult to repair it at this moment. We can think of simulation or whatever, But at least I'm very happy that the European Parliament decided to do an implementation report on the border procedures, because this also makes very much clear what are the problem issues that we should be aware of while negotiating on these proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tineke. That concludes our conversation. We went a bit over time, for which I apologize, but I think it also shows how many different interesting points there are in our conversation around the new pact. And we certainly touched on a lot of them. So a very warm thank you again to all of our panelists, to Catherine, Tineke, Roberta, and also to Alexandra. Also to our audience for joining us and for very interesting questions. And I wish you a good end of the afternoon and evening.